Hey guys, welcome back to The New Critic, and today we're going to be ranking all 15 seasons of Supernatural. So, the show came to an end, and it's time to, wrap up my thoughts on this series as a whole. What are my favorite seasons, my least favorite seasons, and please keep in mind there will be some spoilers here and there, so you've been warned. One thing I never really got a chance to talk about was the fact that the show didn't really need to be 15 seasons. What I mean by this is, I can understand if the network wanted to continue Supernatural for more than, the first 5 seasons, which was the original plan, but after a while, it just felt like it was going nowhere, and it became, for me personally, somewhat of a chore to watch, even though I enjoyed it. And they could have easily trimmed down certain aspects of the series, and it could have been maybe somewhere between 10 to 11 seasons, and that would have been enough. But anyway guys, let's get into it, and keep in mind this is just my opinion. So coming in at number 15, no surprise here, Season 7. Now many consider this to be the lowest point of the show, and I agree with that. But I still enjoyed it regardless, and that's mainly due to the introductions of Charlie and Garth, who are among the best characters of the show, and Dick Roman, who was the leader of the Leviathans. He was entertaining to watch. Bobby Singer's arc was also one of the highlights. But where the season fell short is in the fact that it was the most tedious experience I've had with this show, and that's mainly because it was so episodic to the point where most episodes had kept their story progression to a bare minimum when it came to the overarching narrative. And also, Castiel's arc was reduced to just a couple of episodes, although that's largely due to the fact that Misha Collins, who plays Castiel, took a break from the show for personal reasons. And as a result, what could have been half of a season felt drawn out needlessly to an entire season, and it's made worse by the fact that this was the first season to have 23 episodes rather than just 22. The Leviathans themselves would have been better off as a monster of the week or even a secondary antagonist alongside something more powerful and more intimidating and more interesting. And there's a lot of episodes that were very forgettable, so I still enjoyed it, but it's my least favorite. And overall, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Coming in at number 14 is Season 14. Now, I know there are some people out there who really enjoyed the season and found it to be one of the better seasons, given that Seasons 12 and 13 felt like they were just grasping at straws, and I would agree with that, but I actually enjoyed those seasons more than I thought I would. But with Season 14, it still felt like the glory days of the show were long gone. But that being said, I do like this season because it was like a nice mix of the old and the new when it came to this series. It had some interesting arcs for Jack and Castiel and Chuck returned, and it also had Nick, who was Lucifer's vessel, and how the season started off with Michael as the main antagonist. I thought that was pretty interesting. However, where this season fell short is in the fact that the potential surrounding Michael this season was not fully realized, and I wasn't a huge fan of where Nick's arc was going, specifically in the second half, and the show felt empty at times because certain characters were reduced to guest roles, and they could have done a little bit more with them. But overall, I still enjoyed it, and the best part about it was of course the finale and how it led up to the final season. So overall, it was fun but flawed, and I'd give it a 7 out of 10. So coming in at number 13 is Season 12. Now, I will agree that the show could have also ended at Season 11, considering how ambitious that season was and how much I enjoyed it. But this season definitely had its fair share of good ideas and it aimed for something more grounded in reality with the British Men of Letters storyline, and it had Mary Winchester returning, and I liked her dynamic with Sam and Dean. And Lucifer is the main villain again, but they do things a little bit differently with him. And we even got our first glimpse of the Apocalypse world, which plays a very pivotal role in season 13. But I will admit, the British Men of Letters, they made some decisions that were frustrating, and sometimes they just came off as annoying. Also, while I'm not against killing off characters without bringing them back at all, which makes sense in some cases, one character was killed off at the end of the season, but we knew they were going to come back, so it was pointless, and it was like the 5th time or something like that, so yeah. That got kind of old, killing off characters, bringing them back to life again and again and again, and it had a few weak episodes here and there. But overall, I think it's somewhat underrated, and I give it a 7 out of 10. So coming in at number 12 is season 13. This was a slight improvement over season 12 because seeing the characters explore the Apocalypse world was really, really exciting. And Michael is introduced in this season, as well as Jack, who was born at the end of season 12. And Sam and Dean's conflict with each other over, what to do with him, whether to keep him alive, whether to kill him, that was interesting. However, the first half was a bit of a drag because it was very episodic, and it was pretty much what we've seen in other seasons, but with Jack as well joining Sam and Dean. And Sam and Dean themselves didn't really have any personal storylines or arcs. It would have made this season a little bit more interesting and emotional. And some episodes weren't as good as others. But overall, I actually kind of enjoyed it, and I give it a 7 out of 10. Coming in at number 11, and this might be controversial, so brace yourselves, Season 1. Now, I know many consider this to be one of the best seasons in the entire show, but for me, even without comparing it to everything else that came after it, it's still problematic. For instance, this is when the show was still finding its feet, and it was very derivative. I mean, the concept in itself of two brothers hunting, creatures and monsters and all types of supernatural threats is exciting, but it's basically a fantasy version of X-Files. That's pretty much what it was. And some of the monsters in certain episodes were rehashes of things we've seen before. And the episodic structure of this season kind of got old very, very quickly around the halfway point. So there's actually quite a bit you could skip if you just want to focus on the main story. And some episodes were a little bit weak. But overall, it's still a good season. It's just very flawed. And I'd give it a 7.6 out of 10. Coming in at number 10 is Season 6. Now, I actually enjoy this season more than most people do because it had some interesting ideas, and it proved that everything about Supernatural can still be entertaining even after 5 seasons. I wasn't completely against the show continuing even after the end of season 5, just as long as it didn't overstay its welcome, but we all know how that turned out. I can understand that parts of the season have no real impact on the rest of the show, but for what it was very entertaining. We got introduced to Samuel Campbell, Sam and Dean's grandfather. Dean's reunion with Sam was interesting, and where they went with that. Castiel and Crowley had interesting roles this season, and it had some fun standalone episodes, like Live Free or Twi Hard, which took a giant crap all over the Twilight Saga, and Frontierland, which is a Western-themed episode. And all of the stuff was great, but what I didn't like was the fact that it tried to do so many things in just 22 episodes that it kind of lost its focus, and one of the most important aspects being the Mother of All storyline, it took too long to get there, and when we got there it was only covered in like 5 or 6 episodes and then it's over and done with, and its potential was kind of wasted. And it had a few weak episodes. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and I feel like season 7 squandered some of the potential with certain elements from the season. But overall, I enjoyed it, and I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. Coming in at number 9 is season 2. Now, I was actually debating with myself for a while in terms of where to put this season. Should I put it in my number 9 spot or a little bit higher than that? Well, ultimately, I chose my number 9 spot. Seasons 1 to 3 really revolved around the more horror-centric days of Supernatural. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of the show, sometimes I miss them, because I wasn't extremely impressed with season 1, but season 2 is the season that really got me interested in the show. This is when the more experimental meta-humor episodes and elements kicked in, and it marked the debut of Gabriel, and it had one of my favorite finales, and we got to see Azazel, the demon from season 1, in human form, in the flesh. But one major issue I have with it is that the second half is an absolute drag. There may be 1 or 2 episodes I could recommend. You can watch my season 2 review on that. But after the 10th episode, everything else is completely skippable except for the last 2 episodes, of course, because that's important. And if the episodic structure of season 1 became redundant, you might feel the same way about it here. And some episodes aren't as good as others, but it was a great season, and overall I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Coming in at number 8 is season 9. So this was the season with Metatron as the main antagonist, and there's tons of fallen angels all over the earth, and they all start looking up to Castiel as their leader. And from this point onwards, Crowley was a good guy, and it's largely because of this season that he ultimately became my favorite Supernatural character. Had a couple of enjoyable episodes like Dog Dean Afternoon, which, you know, if you love dogs, you'll enjoy that episode. And it's got an episode with Charlie, there's an episode with Garth, the finale was fantastic. It's got my favorite scene with Crowley, which I can't show you because YouTube will claim the video as always. Bastards. The only major gripe I had with it was that the first half was kind of tedious. Metatron is in the premiere and then he doesn't really show up again until the 9th episode onwards, so yeah, there's that, and a couple of weak episodes, including my least favorite one in the entire series, Bloodlines, which was meant to be a backdoor pilot to a spin-off called Supernatural Bloodlines, but that was scrapped, and rightfully so, because, well, the episode wasn't really good. But overall, I really enjoyed the season, and I'd give it an 8. Coming in at number 7 is season 10. Now, I binged the entire show leading up to the last 7 episodes from April onwards, and around seasons 7, 8, and 9 is where it became a chore to binge. So when season 10 turned out to be as good as it was, I was genuinely surprised. The Mark of Cain storyline and how it affected Dean. We got to see Demon Dean for a couple of episodes. Rowena was introduced. There's a character, I can't remember his name. He wants to get revenge against Dean for murdering his father years ago. Cain also made a return from season 9. There was the 200th episode, Fan Fiction, which is one of the best episodes of the show, in my opinion. What I don't like is that we didn't really get to see enough of Demon Dean, and the rest of the season is kind of a slog because of that, even though Dean is still influenced by the Mark of Cain. And there's a few weak episodes here and there, but overall, it was a fantastic season, and I really enjoyed the way it led up to season 11, one of the biggest seasons in scale. And for those reasons, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Coming in at number 6 is the final season, season 15. Now, I'm happy to say that this season brought the show to a brilliant conclusion. The send-offs for Sam and Dean were great. Their final confrontation with Chuck was great. We had some guest appearances here and there. It had some very emotional moments, some fun standalone episodes. It got off to a very serialized beginning with the first 3 episodes, but it had the tendency to drag at times. It felt somewhat subdued. It didn't have that same level of urgency as some of the seasons that preceded it. Some episodes were a little bit underwhelming, but overall, it's a great way to end the series. The last 2 episodes were hindered by the COVID-19 pandemic because production had to be shut down before they could even start shooting those episodes, but I'm still very happy with what we got, and overall, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Coming in at number 5 is Season 8, the season that introduced the Word of God tablets and had Crowley as the main antagonist. Kevin Tran, who was introduced in Season 7, played a much larger role. The season had my favorite Charlie episode, which was the LARPing episode. LARPing is live-action role-playing, in case you didn't know. Abaddon was introduced, and the finale was fantastic. The only issue I have was that, just like Season 9, the first half was kind of a drag. Things really got more exciting in the second half, as well as a few weak episodes here and there. But overall, this was a very enjoyable season, and it really showcased why Crowley is such a fan favorite, and overall, I'd give it an 8.5. Coming in at number 4 is Season 4. Now this season was the season that kind of changed everything for the show. This is when it delved into fantasy territory, introduced Castiel, angels, demons, and later on the show would delve into angel and demon politics. It had some really good standalone episodes. The show was much more serialized from this season onwards, but what I don't like is how quickly Dean was brought back to life from hell after the ending of Season 3, and I wished they could have spent the entire episode with Sam meeting Castiel and the 2 of them trying to free him, rather than Dean just being freed from the opening minutes, because it kind of diminished the impact of the ending of Season 3 a little bit, as a few weak episodes here and there. But overall, it's fantastic, and it's often regarded as one of the best seasons of the show, and I can understand why. So for that, I'm gonna give it an 8.5. Coming in at number 3 is Season 11. This was a huge opportunity for the show to just end, because I'm sure at the time a lot of people must have been thinking, where else can they go from there? Well, they did have ideas after that, but they just weren't as ambitious as what Season 11 had to offer. The season had Amara, aka the Darkness. She was their biggest threat yet. It had the return of Chuck after quite some time, and he played one of his more prominent roles on the show. It had the bottle episode Baby, with Sam and Dean spending most of their time in the Impala. It was the biggest season in scale. It introduced Billy the Reaper. Lucifer returned, and Castiel being possessed by Lucifer was so much fun to watch. Even though I kinda wish the show ended here, I do like the little threads that were left dangling by the finale. What I don't like is the fact that it felt like something was missing, because the second half is where it kind of drags, and that's where they threw most of their standalone episodes in, and it kind of diminishes the overall urgency of the season, and there's a couple of underwhelming episodes here and there. But overall, it's one of my absolute favorite seasons, and I'd give it an 8.5. So, my top 2. We have Season 3 and Season 5. Now both seasons were fantastic, one of which was affected by the writer's strike, with that being Season 3. the other being the final season with series creator Eric Kripke as the showrunner, and was intended to be the initial conclusion to the show, but it was so popular that it just kept going. So, which of these is it gonna be? Well, there should be no surprise here, but my number 2 is gonna be season 3. This season was trimmed down to 16 episodes rather than the usual 22 because of the writer's strike. But considering the premise of this season, that Dean's life was on the line and he only had a year left to live following the ending of season 2, the shortened length of the season really added to the already present urgency, thus amplifying it. And it had some really enjoyable standalone episodes. The ghost faces from season 1 made a return in one of the most hilarious episodes of the series. It had a great premiere, one of the best finales with one of the most shocking endings. Lilith was a great antagonist. It was the last season for the show's more horror-centric days, and the best one at that among the first 3. The only issue I have is that some episodes aren't as good as others, but everything else about it is fantastic, and we really see Sam and Dean depend on each other like never before, which I think is why the season works so well. So overall, I'm gonna give it a 9.6 out of 10. But of course, my number 1 pick is season 5. The original plan for Supernatural was 5 seasons, and the 5th season brought the show to a satisfying close, or at least the apocalypse arc. It had some of the best urgency in the series. It introduced Lucifer, it introduced the 4 Horsemen, Chuck made a few appearances here and there. It felt like the world was being brought to its knees. It had one of my favorite Gabriel episodes. Some episodes definitely aren't as good as others, but this was one of the most unforgettable experiences I've had with any TV show, and I'm gonna give it a 9.6 out of 10. Should the show have ended here? Maybe. It still could have continued on after season 5, but 15 seasons is enough, in my opinion. So yeah, that was my ranking of all 15 seasons of Supernatural. As Jensen Ackles, who played Dean Winchester, said, this is not the end of the road, it's just a see you later kind of thing. And they could be back with a movie or a reboot or a mini-series, and that would be fine. But for now, I think it's time to give it a rest. So next time we're gonna be looking at Season 5 of Fear the Walking Dead. So thank you all for watching. Please be sure to like the video, share it and subscribe, and hit the notification icon. Be safe during this time, and I'll see you soon.